In the news, we talk a lot about healthcare, who gets covered and what gets covered, but very rarely do we talk about mental health care. Many resources go towards curing physical ailments, while mental health care is often deprioritized. Americans with the least amount of resources, many of whom are at risk of being thrown into the criminal justice system, are the ones who suffer the most. This means that far too often, prisons are the only places their health care needs are met. In America, 3.2% of men and 4.9% of women suffer from severe mental illnesses. In prisons, these numbers rise to about 14.5% of men and 31% of women. Symptoms of mental illness are relatively common to see within prison walls and can be worsened with disciplinary actions like solitary confinement. So how did we get to this point? In 1981, under the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, President Ronald Reagan repealed the Mental Health Systems Act, which Jimmy Carter passed just a year earlier. The Mental Health Systems Act was part of a larger initiative led by the Carter administration to improve mental health care in the United States. It offered grants to community centers to provide mental health care on a community level rather than an institutional level. Federal funding to improve mental health care has generally gone down ever since this act was approved. Because of acts like this, people who would originally be taken care of in institutions specifically designed to handle mental illness were often left with no resources. They had no one to help them find food, shelter, work, and perhaps most importantly, treatment. For many of these individuals, going to prison is the only way to receive these resources, adding to the already rapidly rising rates of incarceration in the United States. Perhaps one of the worst aspects of the prison system is the concept of solitary confinement. Solitary confinement is a disciplinary tactic meant for dangerous or potentially dangerous inmates. Inmates with severe mental illnesses can be unfortunate enough to be labeled as dangerous and can be placed into solitary confinement rather than receiving help from a mental health professional, which can worsen their symptoms. Inmates can be thrown into solitary confinement for days, months, or even years at a time, spending as much as 23 hours a day completely alone with little to no human contact. Such conditions can exacerbate paranoia, psychosis, perceptual distortions, cognitive disturbances, aggression, depression, and anxiety, just to scratch the surface. Extended stays in solitary can even have long-lasting adverse health effects, including sleep disturbances, nightmares, phobias, depression, anxiety, emotional dependence, confusion, impaired memory and concentration, and the inability to regain necessary social skills. So not only do prisons do a poor job of treating mental illnesses, they can actually worsen their symptoms. It's not like we're doing much to fix this problem either. In mid-2016, the Obama administration announced that it would phase out the use of private prisons on the federal level. Trump's Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, has since rescinded this order. Cuts in federal funding to the few existing programs that help those with mental illnesses means that even more people will get caught in this revolving door. And we haven't even touched on the indirect issues of our mental health care system. Drug addiction is incredibly common in poorer communities, as is lead poisoning, underfunded public schools, and an increased police presence, all of which can lead to a lack of resources to take care of the people in these communities, an increase in the incarcerated population, and can have an effect on one's mental health. And of course, being incarcerated stays with you for life. When applying for jobs or finding a place to live, you have to check a box, forcing you to label yourself as being previously incarcerated. This makes people vulnerable to the stigmas attached to such a label, which tends to dehumanize them rather than letting them be seen as a person and be recognized for their accomplishments. Once you're trapped in the cycle, it's hard to get out. It's also a cycle that's easy to fall into. From a young age, people in these communities are subjected to heightened surveillance by the police, gang injunctions that restrict people's freedoms, and random searches like stop and frisk. Children grow up feeling criminalized in their neighborhoods and their schools, all before even committing a crime. When you're always being told that you're a criminal, you begin to internalize it. Under all of this scrutiny, small missteps have life-altering consequences. There are organizations working to end the school-to-prison pipeline, abolish solitary confinement, and to provide resources to the communities that are vulnerable to the carceral system. It's important to join an organization, educate yourself and others, and/or be a good advocate to the cause. As advocates, we must be careful not to speak over those who have lived these experiences, but united, we can work to make our justice system actually just.